Alright, so what we're doing today is we're going to be doing a curriculum map based on the standards, and especially the mathematical Common Core standards. So we've got this standard right in here: create equations in two or more variables to represent relationships between quantities, graph equations on coordinate axes with labels and scales. Okay, so this is an example with this curriculum map. This is the one thing that we're working on right here, right now. That's today's topic. In order to be able to do this, we need to ensure that over on the left side, we've got all the pre-knowledge created for that, okay? And that's stuff that we would assess beforehand, make sure that our students are familiar with and aware of and have mastered, so that way as they move into this, they aren't going to be too lost. We've got everything in place, okay? And then over on the right side, this will lead to other things. So this is a pre-knowledge thing for some of those others. So we're going to go into just a little bit of the different standards that are available out there. Okay, and so this one is a high school algebra standard, and it's standard number 2. So if you kind of look around some of those, you're going to find standard number 1. And standard number 1 is, creating equations and inequalities with a single variable. Okay, in order to do 2 or more variables, we should be able to do 1 variable first. Okay, now within the Common Core standards, there's no set order for things to go, so looking around doesn't mean just looking before. One of the other algebra standards, Algebra 3, so this one comes right after, is representing the constraints by equations or inequalities, and by systems of equations and or inequalities, and interpret solutions as viable or non-viable options in a modeling context. This second part of the standard is really an important part for helping to create good equations, okay? So if I am actually looking at that and saying that's a reasonable answer, okay, that's something I want students to be doing back with the 1 variable things, and then that way they've got that skill as they move into 2 variable, whether or not that's going to be a reasonable answer, okay? So this is kind of an interesting thing with the Common Core standards, is that the numbering system is kind of just reference only, okay? So we need to be thinking about that. Now, an interesting one as well, the other algebra standard number 4, is rearranging formulas to highlight a certain quantity. Now this could go before or after, okay? We could put it here in the pre-knowledge, or it could go after. It's not directly related, like has to be before our current standard, but some teachers may prefer it to be up there. Some teachers may prefer it to be after that, okay? And you can justify either place's location, okay? For our use here, I'm going to put it up front, okay? Because that's something I like to have students be able to do, is know how to manipulate and work with that, having a basis typically in 1 variable and can move all of our other numbers around. Now they have that kind of a skill as they would move into this, okay? Now, other things that we can include here, because these are all the other high school standards on algebra and creating equations. I could go all the way back. It talks about using coordinate planes. So I could pull out this one, okay? This is the 5th grade standard when we first introduce the coordinate plane. And all the details about it. It's a long standard. I'm not even going to read it. It's too long for that, okay? But it's all about understanding the coordinate plane. This, really, in this curriculum map, may be too basic, right? It is really a prerequisite standard to other standards. I don't need to go all the way to 5th grade, okay? So if I throw that out, I do still want something about the coordinate plane, okay? And so being able to pull in something a little bit more recent, 7th grade, about equations and variable, okay, and being able to work with those quantities, simple equations, and inequalities, okay, representing them. One of the ways of representing them that I need to clarify a little bit in here is using the coordinate plane. I can also pull in the actual graph proportional relationships. So if I'm graphing here, then that 5th grade big standard, that would be a prerequisite to this one, right? And that's something that they dealt with in 7th grade and made sure that my students had all the capabilities and skills leading up to graphing proportional relationships, okay? It's hard to do that if you don't have that prerequisite skill. So this, I mean, there's a lot more out there, and we could put tons and tons of things in that pre-knowledge, but some of them picking out our standards very strategically. That way we're going to get things that we don't have to include every little detail about them, okay? So this is probably not a full inclusive list of everything that you'd put into here for your pre-knowledge, okay? I've only got 5 standards. Some of them will only have 1 or 2 standards. Some may have 30 different standards, especially as we work with some of the more complex standards of the high school curriculum, okay? Now on this right side, after I've accomplished this, after I can now work with 2 or more variables, okay, then what can I do? You know, what are the next standards that I can do, as well as what other skills? And so a lot of times, like here, we're focused on standards and being able to map those out. But you could put a lot of different things over on this right side about, job skills, qualifications. You could take this kind of a course now that you have this under your belt, okay? So looking specifically at a few of the standards that we have, having this algebra skill and capability, okay? And if I've got this, again, I talked about that this number 4 could be a post as well. Could be an after knowledge, something that this is leading up to. It can work in both places, okay? I'm going to leave it over here on the left for now because I've got a few other standards that should really be considered for this, okay? And especially, so we're going to interpret the slope, rate of change, and the intercept of a linear model in the context of the data, right? Now, this one might be able to go up front, so after we actually do all the solving and the working, then we can create the equation. So this could maybe go a couple of places, but I'm going to deal with the equations, and then that second part, the graph, okay? We can graph things, but then being able to interpret that comes as a later skill for it, okay? So that is a really important thing, that this is necessary as we work with X and Y in a slope-intercept form, being able to then understand what X and Y are and the intercepts. That kind of comes second, okay? And again, that's why these are important, because for each teacher, it might be a little bit of graphing in different ways. So if this is the important thing and comes first, and then we get to the equations, that's good to know, okay? So, a couple other ones, using coordinates to prove geometric theorems algebraically, okay? So the coordinates are x, y. I've got to use at least 2 variables in there. I can't prove anything algebraically if I can't create the equation, if I don't understand how that works, okay? As well as, with that, we can prove slope criteria of parallel perpendicular lines, right? So we see how teaching this one thing has meaning and connection for several things yet to come, okay? And so the mapping of this one standard, what all we need to do beforehand, okay? What all we need to do after. And sometimes what things are open for the interpretation, okay? Because of that, there's no set way that needs to be taught, okay? That's one of the things that the Common Core lays out in the introduction pretty clearly. There is no set order within a grade, because some of these things can move around within that grade and say this needs to be done first or this needs to be done first. It doesn't matter. Some students will understand one concept first and some will understand another. Being able to teach those and be ready for both of them at the same time is going to be key and helpful for determining where we are here right now, how do we get there, and where are we trying to go with it.